Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Cooperative City in Quarantine, episode
not yet.
13. Not yet. It says it's live, no?
Really?
I think so. Well, if not, they're going to get it halfway through. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Cooperative City in Quarantine, episode number 13. Till today, I am speaking to you from my garden, but luckily, in comparison to the last months, I've actually been allowed to go out, and I hope so have you. And we're looking forward to knowing also what is happening to those of you who are following us from different cities around Europe. Today, we have a fantastic panel with us that is going to discuss a very pressing issue in our days, also before all this COVID emergency, but clearly the sanitary crisis the health crisis has really brought to the attention the social issues that are already challenging our society. So today we will be discussing about social inclusion and what is happening around, especially Europe, but not only. Today we will be looking also at what is happening in the US with all the issues that we know also from the protests because of the brutal killings, but also what is happening in African cities who might be getting a little bit of less attention nowadays. We have a fantastic table with us. Our speakers are, we have Adam Curtis. Well, first of all, excuse me, my co-moderator today is my dear friend and colleague, Bahanur Nasya. Hi, Bahanur.
Hello.
So today, as usual, as it is in Cooperative City, a very, very female managed table. Not always, we do give space also to men. In fact, we do have two representatives with us today, but we like to also bring forward to the discussion about social inclusion is also making sure that also in all our events and in all our activities, we also have the diversity of our society as much as possible represented. So today, and our panels are fantastic representatives of this, we have with us Adam Curtis from Nabolagshager, forgive my pronunciation, in Norway, which is running a placemaking project in Oslo. Hello, Adam.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're very welcome, and we're looking forward to knowing more about your work. So with us is also Giulia Maci from the Cities Alliance with a specific focus on urban development and gender inclusion in African cities. Hi, Giulia.
Hi, hello.
Where are you based right now?
Brussels.
Brussels, fantastic.
Brussels, yes.
So we have also with us Rozina Spinnoy, who also is based in Brussels, representing BID with social design and is working on especially social inclusion in business improvement districts in Brussels. Hello, Rozina.
Hi there, nice to be here.
We're very happy to have you with us. Now we move from Brussels, we move down to Lisbon, where we have Franco, who has two hats, if so we can say. He's on the one hand, the Deputy City Councillor on Housing and Local Development of the City of Lisbon, but also one of the managers or promoters of the network of the community-led local development of the City of Lisbon that counts approximately 170 or so organizations addressing urban poverty in the City of Lisbon. Is that correct, Rui?
It is correct. Hello, everybody, Danny included.
Very welcome. We're happy to have you with us. And then we now move back to more Northern Europe, and we have with us Minouche from Steeple and the Placemaking Europe Network. Hi, Minouche.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me. Looking forward.
So I think at this point we have introduced briefly our speakers, and Bahanur, would you like to say a few words about what are we going to address today? What is the main challenges that we are going somehow, some initial coordinates of what we will be talking about today?
We as designers are kind of the setters for the cities, and our cities are somehow historic manifesto and represent our culture, but also the hierarchy in our cities. So we want to discuss how can we, with architecture, placemaking, arts projects, culture projects, but also politics, change this to include everyone. So we have a panel with with proven projects, and they also could somehow handle the current situation with the pandemic very well. So our topic will be social inclusion in practice, and we will hear about what we have to keep in mind when we try to include everyone, and what is actually possible.
Thank you, Bahanur. So before having our speakers, we would like to share with you a little input also to sort of frame a little bit the discussion with words of somebody who definitely has very, very relevant experiences to share. And if technology is on my side, please.
When you live in a poor neighborhood, you're living in an area where you have to have poor schools. When you have poor schools, you have poor teachers. When you have poor teachers, you get a poor education. Poor education, you can only work on a poor paying job. And that poor paying job enables you to live again in a poor neighborhood. So it's a very vicious cycle.
So in the words, very brief words of Malcolm X, I think nowadays this is probably very good speaker to bring us, to introduce us also to what is the topic for today, and also to bring us to our speakers. In this very pressing moment, we have seen the incredible images coming from the US, and this is also why at this point we would like to also ask Işın, if you could, very welcome first of all, once again.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, I actually, please forgive me. Okay, back office information. It was Bahanur's turn to make the question. Please forgive me. So, welcome. It is a homemade cooperative city, and welcome all. And this, sorry then, at this point, forgive me for the confusion. So this also helps to also deformalize a little bit the discussion. And I use the opportunity to also tell our audience to also send us a sign of life. Tell us, where are you from? Where are you watching us from? And what is happening in your cities? Because we see that there is a very big diversity of what is happening. This said, apologies. Bahanur, go ahead.
As Daniela said, our colleague Levente Poljak is online. He is collecting all the questions, so don't be shy. Let us know what you think, or let us your questions, forward us your questions. The video was very powerful, yes, and it's very sad. It's so old, so many decades old, and still it's very relevant. And Işın is from New York. She was with the protesters. She's an activist, a curator, a teacher. She has experience from Turkey, Vienna, actually, Europe, and also from the States. And I would like to ask her, what are the main problems? How do you see it in New York, or how do you experience it in New York? And what kind of empowerment and inclusion, social inclusion, can we manage to do, even though we are 2020?
And I have 3 minutes for this, right? For all the problems and all their solutions, 3 minutes, great. If I can do that in 3 minutes, I think we wouldn't have had any problems. But in US right now, there is a great movement is happening, and it's incredibly, just like the pandemic itself, the movement is getting really strongly, in a very global way, growing and growing. And maybe a little bit thanks to pandemic, people could be in their homes and follow the news. But a very striking, a very strong, a very devastating image right in front of our eyes this time triggered this movement. But otherwise, this problem has been happening so long. It is not only the history of US, but histories of all our nations are based on some sort of discrimination, racism, etc. So that's why the movement is developing so wonderfully right now, and it gives me a lot of hope. And The problem obviously is different everywhere. In a very similar way, the discrimination and the lack of diversity in power situations, the main problem is who has the access to what? Who can claim spaces? Who can be in public spaces? Who has the word? And who can get the education, etc. So the main problem is the social injustice that is lacking right now. This is what we are not able to have. We have not been able to build social justice in most of our societies. We have some versions of it available in some of our societies, but we know that there is always certain ethnic groups, certain genders, certain classes, etc. are underrepresented. They don't have the power, they don't have the access to certain positions, educations, etc. So this social inequality is creating all these issues that we are facing right now. So maybe these are all the problems of capitalism, what I'm trying to summarize here, perhaps. But the movement going on right now is also against the police violence, which is also another growing issue. The police forces becoming like armies that are defending the power mechanisms against their own people, right? Against the taxpayers also. So this is also another global pandemic that we have to fight globally. And this is what is happening, I believe, right now.
Thank you very much, Işın. This is, you did it. In short, you could put together what the root of the problems is.
Thank you.
As next, we would like to talk to Adam. Would you like to take on, Dani?
Dani, you're muted.
She's in mute. Okay.
Okay. It's been a long week for me as well, so sorry, but okay. Thanks a lot.
It's Friday. It's fine.
Friday after long weeks and long months. But so what I was saying is thanks, Işın, for the inputs and the insights, and moving also from what is happening also in the US, which we're following a lot, then moving down to Oslo, which is at least in the perspective, from a European perspective, much quieter, peaceful. Everything is perfect in Norway. Can you tell us a little bit what about your project and what you see, how you see that this has been affected, and what you see that is happening? What are the major emergencies and social inclusion issues that have been emerging also with the crisis in your project?
Yeah, so we're working on a larger research project that is European-wide on placemaking. It's called Place City, and we are working specifically on the east side of Oslo. The neighborhood is called Grønland, and Grønland is well known for social issues. About half of children in Grønland live under poverty. There's also a large issue with young people in Grønland feeling hopeless about being able to find a job when they are done with high school. And what we also know in that space is that there is a lack of enough public spaces. Many people who live in Grønland are fairly new to Norway, or their parents were new to Norway, and they live very densely. And as such, there's a very high need for public space as a third space to promote domestic harmony in the household. So we are working directly with the high school here in Grønland to try to tackle some of these issues. We really believe that multifunctional approaches to any problem are the only way to have significant impact. So we are using placemaking as a tool to empower young people at the school to be able to address some of these issues. Quite directly, how COVID has affected this project. Schools went online here in Norway, and we were unable to get access directly to students at large. But an interesting aspect of our project is that we have used our funding to actually hire young people who go to the school to basically run the project. They act as researchers, they act as facilitators. They are the eyes and ears on the ground making the project happen. And so those young people have continued to work for us online through the crisis. And it's provided a really nice opportunity for us to slow our project down and really assess our next steps to make sure that the impact is going to be sustainable and significant as we had wanted.
Thank you very much, Adam. Yeah, I'm very happy that you can continue the project and that the young students are still on board and can work somehow, even if it's digitally. Giulia Maci from Cities Alliances, you are involved in a network which is focusing on women's inclusion in African cities. How is the situation in Africa? What are the biggest challenges in the communities there?
So thank you very much for this invitation. Yes, so normally we work in long-term projects, so in cities, development, inclusion, and we built also lines locally. And now basically all our programs have been suspended because of the COVID. And we've been asked to really support, especially informal community, people living in informal settlements and informal workers in this COVID situation, this COVID crisis. And the worst was, of course, the lockdown, because we are talking about the majority of people in many African cities and worldwide. We're talking about 2 billion informal workers worldwide. And we are talking about an economy that is really based on informal economy. And these people couldn't work for months, and they depend on daily wages and daily income. For instance, in Uganda, in Kampala, only the people working in the food sector, they were able to continue to work, but they were obliged to sleep, for example, in the market. And the majority of these food vendors were women. So they were also more exposed to malaria, to other form of disease, but also to physical violence, institutional physical violence. So we are talking about a crisis. We need to respond. It's a humanitarian crisis, but in reality, we are talking about structural problems. We are talking about countries that just go from a crisis to another. We are working in Liberia that just came out from the Ebola crisis, and now they are again back to the COVID situation and crisis. So I think now we are trying to respond quickly to the need, trying to keep also protect, for example, informal workers in the way they could continue their work, distributing food, distributing medical equipment. But we are trying also to address kind of structural issues like access to basic services, basic infrastructure. We are talking about, of course, all the advice from WHO is like washing your hands, keeping social distance, and all this advice are not applicable in this kind of context. So the question is also how, and we are trying to work on that in terms of communication and advocacy through radio program, through television, how to translate these messages in the context. So distributing water, giving access to soap, but like trying to interpret this kind of messages in the context.
Thank you very much, Giulia. Those are situations which we hardly can relate to because we are more talking about working hours and about unemployment money and so on in Europe, and
but I think
difficult situations.
The aspect of informality, I think, is also true in Europe. So the COVID is also revealing how dependent we are to certain work, and especially also informal work, the food sector, for instance. And then the second is also the key role of the community. We are seeing also we have to collaborate with community and community organization to reach out the most vulnerable, to understand what are the needs, to distribute the items. So the key role of the community and the collaborative actions is key, I think.
Thank you, Giulia. You made the perfect introduction for Rozina. Rozina, would you like to share with us your aims with the Business Improvement District and also the parallels with Brussels and the presented cities and disadvantaged population groups? How do you work and what do you pay attention to in your work?
Yeah. Well, some of you may know, of course, the bids, you know, there's been some sort of controversy, of course, over the bids over the years with business improvement districts. So what I tried to do, and when we started this, it was when we had our last trauma in the city, which was when we had the terrorist attacks in 2016. And that's when I seen really this sort of need for community, just following on from what Giulia was saying and what we've heard before, of course, about the community coming together. And it's been really looking at how we can create those partnerships, but have that community-based care and really take the holistic side also, because bids have always been, I would say, involved in some way in the placemaking aspect. When I'd attended one of the first sort of large global conferences when it was about towns, and we had the Cape Town partnership there, and it was all about the social aspect, about community care and how we work together. So this also brought me to really looking at, you know, of course, what creates that community feeling. How do we create this? How do we bring people together, but also looking at the healthy community? And I have a personal interest in the mental health, also with having a son who's neurodiverse and having mental health challenges. So it brought me during this period, especially, I think it really magnified the challenges that I think many youth and many people with mental health challenges were having. Now, we're very blessed. We've got a beautiful little urban garden, but across the road, there's a block of apartments where there's no balcony. You know, there's no outdoor space. So it's really been looking also at the urban placemaking and link with mental health and how we need to, you know, as I said, it's been magnified. I mean, we've always said there's maybe, what, 1 in 4 of us have mental health challenges. I actually think it's all of us at some point in our life. And so there were some projects that the improvement districts got involved in with local schools about 2-3 years ago, where it was bringing together kids from neurodiverse backgrounds and special needs schools and the mainstream school, and how they can use creativity really to come together, also for the outdoor space as well as for inside the classroom, and a little bit of kind of redesigning our systems bottom up. Because improvement districts here in Belgium, for me, is very bottom up. It's like Sweden. We don't have the legislative tax levy that a lot of the countries do have. So it's been really taking the community role. And also, it's brought me into other projects of how do we move about space if we're physically disabled or if we're neurodiverse. Our cities and towns are not designed, they're designed for exclusion. They're not designed for inclusion. And so it's brought me to also look and reach out to some of the municipalities here to work together and to see how can we look at some of the spaces that are due for renovation for the future, and how can we engage an inclusive community at all different levels, and also offline and online. And some of those you know, projects have also brought me to outside of bids, where it's also been about women and inclusion, and looking at all the different activities and highlighting and showcasing what women from diverse backgrounds who would normally not have a showcase, what they've been doing, and giving them a platform with a Women 100 project that I'm part of as well. So during this period, it's actually just emphasized the need for inclusion at all different levels, including the digital gap. There's been fantastic initiatives from Friends of Digital, you know, is it Digital for Inclusion, where it's also about collecting laptops for youth that don't have access to, you know, to laptops when they were homeschooling. So everything during this period for me has been especially about this inclusion. And obviously, as you mentioned, with the Black Lives Matter, it's been really interesting looking at Placemaking US and some of the conversations there regarding the Porch Week And it's been a real learning experience to understand also how space is linked to culture, and how we use these spaces. So I think there's an awful lot out there, and certainly I think we need a lot more discussions about inclusion at many different levels across our communities, not just the cities.
Thanks, Rozina. I think the issue that you raise about structural inclusion is a quite also good point of transition also to our next speaker, Rui, because Rui, as a representative of the City Council, then also can share with us also the work that has been done in Lisbon for now approximately 10 years with the BIPZIP program. You have a set of different tools to promote social inclusion and empower citizen empowerment in priority neighborhoods of the city. You also are running an URBAC network of cities sharing your experiences with other cities in Europe that want to improve their strategies. And you are the representative here also of the network of community-led local development, who is operating a grant. All of this, so you have different hats on which and different points of perspective on the whole story. Can you share with us what you see that is happening in the city of Lisbon? How with the crisis, which of the challenges have been exacerbated by the current crisis, and how with the CLLD are you especially, but also with the City Council, are you aiming to address some of these issues? An easy question, just to start with.
Peace on earth. Well, to start, let me thanks for the introduction video, because I think we need to go to the very clear bottom of the challenge, which is urban economy often tends to concentrate GDP, production, wealth, but also almost always prevailing forms of injustice and poverty, which goes from generation to generation. And what we've been facing for the last 3 months here is that everyone with less stability, with no savings back in the bank, with more informal forms of work and income, tends to suffer way more. But this is on the income level, which is just a part of the challenge. But just to give a very straightforward example, which everyone can understand. A teenager from a wealthy family suffers less with a lack of presential schooling than one from a poor background, when even if you would have internet and computers, which some still don't, to have online schooling like they're all having now, it's not the same having 20 minutes access to a certain teacher a day and having no one at home or in direct network of contacts would help him to understand and to develop his or her skills in a certain subject at school. And this again only deepens the gap of where the background of some person living in the city well makes the challenge even harder. To add on the introduction video, there's also an added challenge on those coming from poverty, from poor backgrounds, is that in the city, not only all this uncertainty and lack of social and family background, is also the fact that life is way more expensive in cities. So it is way more dramatic to get unemployed or to have a below average income living in an urban environment or living in a rural environment. And that's where we try to act, basically focusing resources and power to those in these communities, which again have poverty coming from several generations up to now, so that they can really break the gap, targeting the causes of inequality, to make them, well, to give everybody the same opportunity to live a decent and a happy living. I hope I have been able to be clear, but of course I'll be I'll be around.
Thank you very much, Rui. I tried to provoke our panelists, but Giulia immediately answered that we have poverty or exclusion in Europe, in our cities, which are more close to us as well. And I would like to talk to Minouche. I saw her the last time in Valencia in Placemaking Week Europe, and she was presenting a book called Our Cities, and it was all about social inclusion, and there were so many workshops and exchanges planned, and then happened pandemic. So where do you stand? How do you work on those issues, which were very well addressed by all our panelists?
Thank you so much. Yes, so we had the book and at Stipo, and of course with Placemaking Week, of Placemaking Europe. It's all about how do we work on areas, on cities, on squares where people don't feel excluded but feel included, and that takes extra work. And one of the funny things that happened during COVID times is that because of the intelligent lockdown, elderly are supposed to stay in the Netherlands, but the younger people were allowed to be in the streets. And the moment that we started to do participatory work, developing new green spaces in an area in Utrecht, that was the exact moment that our Prime Minister gave the press conference. So we had this big room full of people that we were going to work together with, and suddenly we were no longer allowed to go outside. So we made all these plans, but working online gave us the opportunity to start working with kids a lot more. And kids were also a lot more outside. So we really had to flip our thinking, and we came up with a Minecraft environment for kids in that area, because of course they were home, they were not going to school, and but most of them were playing Minecraft. So we started working with completely new tools, giving a very big voice actually to the kids in comparison to how we normally do it, because then you often have these gatherings where a lot of adults come, and the kids do play a role, but a different one. And now the kids were suddenly the entry to their parents and to their grandparents, which gave a different conversation. And they also came up with lots of different ideas. So we used Minecraft, we used posters that we handed out in the houses, and that they cut and paste, they put color on, and they could send them back to us. So it was a complete new way of organizing ourselves, but it gave a lot of feedback from the kids. And what you see, especially in these areas, and this was mentioned also, is that a lot of the houses are really small. And so the kids are suddenly stuck in their houses, they can't go out. In my country, a lot of attention went to the elderly. But if I was looking around to the kids, I mean, they were deprived of their social lives, especially if you're in the aging of puberty. I mean, your social life is everything. And suddenly you can't go to school, you have to stay inside, you can't go out. All the sports facilities were closed. You were not allowed to go and play calisthenics outside. I mean, so it also showed the incredible importance of having good housing, but also having good public spaces. Some of the spaces that we were allowed to go to, they were becoming so crowded. And you start to realize how important it is to have good social spaces, good public spaces just around the corner of your house, where you can meet your friends, where you can do things. And one of the funny things that I noticed when we started talking to kids, and we've done this in other projects as well, because we somehow managed to go with the 1.5 meter distancing to continue to do participatory work outside. So we did bike rides and stuff. That the ideas that they come up with are often very much in line with what the rest of us also want. I mean, they were talking about a kitten cafe. They were talking about shops in their own neighborhood so they don't have to go long distances. They wanted to have areas where they gather, and especially with the youngsters. I mean, often we see them as the guys who hang out that cause a burden, that feel that you don't want to go there at night because it's creepy, because there's all these kids outside, which is stupid. I mean, at every age, you have the right to be outside and to appropriate that space. And since we don't really give them an opportunity and an area to be in, and see them as, you know, some kinds of bit scary because it's a group of boys, and it's like, we don't really integrate their wishes and their ambitions to be outside as a place where you also meet different people. And we really have to, and I think that debate is also shifting now, because you do see the need of a lot of young people to be outside. And we have to think about that differently. Instead of being a burden on the public space, we should really integrate their wishes. And yeah, so there's so much to tell about this, but I'll stuck to this.
Thank you, Minouche. Well, anyway, we will also have more time also for commenting further, also based on the questions that are arriving from the audience. But before getting on to that, we would like to share with you another video, because a lot of the work that is being done also by us in Eutropian is trying to promote also policy work and connecting some of these bottom-up initiatives with policy work. And this is also how we're, since he is in contact also with Rui, trying to push some of the work that many of you are also doing, and I think also Giulia and many of you also in your organization are pushing this forward in trying to bring it to the policy level. So we would like to share with you a short video by Ivan Tosic, who was one of the experts that was working on the EU urban agenda addressing urban poverty. So it was a policy work that was carried out over the last couple of years to try and improve the knowledge, the policy and the funding addressing urban poverty from the EU. So if technology is on my side, I will share with you this video.
Pact is I would say, a new idea which is based on two older ideas which are considered to be good. And one of these ideas was the Urban Community Initiative, and the other idea is the CLLD. So the local pact tries to put these two ideas together to create a new framework for programs which are dealing with the deprived areas. So the idea is to bring back the urban element, and this element is a kind of multi-level governance structure. There some European money, but basically the national level and the local level should make an agreement with each other that they finance together a program of deprived neighborhoods, which is developed together with the population and NGO's and entrepreneurs, etc. Deprived neighborhoods. Now, this is
kun jij even de voordeur open doen? Ik zit in een call, ik kan er niet uit. We zitten hier op de deur te bellen.
That these actors should come together and they should develop together the program. So now, it will be time to bring in this CLLD element in broader way in more European cities. And you can imagine the local pact that there is a deprived neighborhood selected based on indicators, etc. Then there is a pact, an agreement signed in a way between the European cohesion policy money, the national government and the local government, and this agreement goes then to a CLLD group, where I told you the local government is in, NGOs are in, residents are in, etc. And this group gets 1 year time when they really discuss what can be done from this amount of money in this area, which would really bring forward the situation in this area. So maybe we should not improve the buildings from outside, but we should introduce training programs. We should give help to the homeless people. We should really include the people into the work itself, which is the public space and also the residential areas, the shopkeepers, etc. So a kind of joint program developed bottom up, and then this program should be handed over to the local government. Obviously, the local government has to make a final decision because the local government is the beneficiary of the European money. And the hope is that if this program is developed by this group that the local government was part, then the local government will approve it. But the group should stay, and the group should always monitor what is the fate of this intervention. This can be a new software, a new know-how for countries which want to make area-based interventions in deprived or priority neighborhoods, how we call it nowadays. It gives the paper itself gives a very structured description of what could be the steps and what are the important ideas which you should follow. And this could be one of the ways how the cohesion policy money, it could be spent if the national governments want to do it. Last point, that it is obviously again on the decision of the national governments, because the national governments are the gatekeepers of European money. The Urban Party Partnership is now the owner of this program, which was developed by Urbeck. And we very much hope that in the ongoing EU discussion, we hope that the upcoming German presidency, the new Leipzig Charter, they are all talking about the importance of neighborhoods and the importance of area-based policies. So we hope that there will be a possibility for this know-how to go into the EU structures, and we hope that this idea will be applied in the next programming period.
So thanks, Ivan, for sharing this and the ongoing work that is being done in the very diverse spectrum of EU policy and discussion. Which brings us to some of the questions that are arriving also from the audience, and we invite anybody who we're heading slowly towards the end of the discussion, so we invite anybody to make your questions and comments and criticism also. You might totally disagree with what some of our speakers have said, so this is the right moment to sort of spike up the discussion, if you like. But one of the questions that we're receiving is, in practice nowadays, what is actually happening in terms of social inclusion programs and policies, based also on what we heard from Ivan, which is obviously was a project done before COVID-19, and it's a long-term discussion for the next funding period of 21-27. What is actually being done exactly now to really promote the inclusion of, for example, excluded families, and what is it happening in what Giulia already started mentioning to us, and Rui, we know you with the CLLD, which also Ivan was mentioning as an infrastructure, you are opening a new grants program, and maybe Rozina also, you're working very closely with municipalities. What are you seeing that is actually the actions that are being taken in place to ensure the inclusion? Who would like to start? Go, Rozina. I see you unmuted yourself. Go ahead.
Well, for me, a lot of the stuff is initiated at grassroots level. And then the buy-in happens after with municipalities. I mean, a lot of initiatives regarding social inclusion, it's from the NGOs, it's from the social innovators, the change makers. And then there's the reach out to the local municipalities or local government. So that's the way I'm experiencing it, I have to be honest. I'm not seeing anything that's been ultimately top down, other than perhaps the odd municipality like my own, for example. They're starting sort of citizens groups, which will be a sort of systemic part of the municipality, where they'll for different sectors, for different topics, where they want to create little task forces to keep that engagement up. But in terms of what I'm seeing on a top-down level, I don't know. I've not experienced, maybe I'm wrong, I'm not experiencing any sort of new initiatives other than what was already happening pre-COVID regarding the sort of gender inclusion policies and all these kind of things. But regarding much of what I've seen during COVID, it has been an awful lot from the ecosystem that's been happening. And then, you know, even for example, the example of the youth requiring that don't have access to computers. I mean, that was really a bottom-up initiative by an NGO that then got ministers on board. So that's what I'm experiencing. I don't know how others are experiencing it during this time, if there's been a sort of a burst of initiatives, or maybe like the sewing of the masks and all these kind of things, bringing women together in a space who are able to do these things. Then the municipality supports it, and then they also fund and distribute. That's probably the most obvious one I can think of at the moment.
If I can add on before Rui and Giulia, I think, but obviously a question open to everybody, is also some of the, we discussed some of the target groups, but probably amongst the most evident were, for example, the homeless, and there were some target groups that somehow are the forgotten that really emerged very evidently. Can you tell us a little bit, maybe a few, out of the actions that you saw in your cities or that you supported, what are Giulia already started mentioning some of the forgotten categories that somehow were remembered, sadly, in this moment.
Can I say something about that, Daniela? I think that is also what's happening now with the COVID, is that things that we didn't see are now becoming, you know, in your face. So one of the things that happened in the Netherlands was that people working in meat construction factories, a lot of the people from Poland, like worker immigrants, working on really harsh conditions. They are employed by, well, they're put in houses for lots of people, and then they're put in buses up to the factories, and then they're put to work there. And that whole system sort of was not seen if you're not part of that system. So it's outside, it's just not on your scope. And suddenly there were big outbreaks in these factories. And then people started to realizing, oh, but these people travel in very crowded buses. They live in houses under very conditions that we wouldn't imagine happening in the Netherlands or in a Western country. They are taken disadvantage of. So this was all of a sudden out in the open. So I guess things like this are happening right now, and immediately force action on a national level, because the problem of that person, that individual that, you know, traveled from Bulgaria or from Poland or from wherever to set up a better future here for a time being, now suddenly is a national problem. It's a health hazard. So if the conditions of the life of this person doesn't change, it is a problem for the whole of the Netherlands. And now suddenly you see that action can be taken, which is, I don't know how I feel about that, but I'm at least happy that change is being made. Mm-hmm. So I think this is one of the things that is happening.
Giulia, Rui, yes. I saw you unmuted yourself. Who would like to share a bit of insights?
Shall I? Yeah. So
please.
Looking at the Global South, I have to say that in a very short term, a lot of funding have been reprogrammed by the EU and other donors towards, of course, this crisis, so supporting vulnerable groups. There was a lot of actions in this regards. As has been mentioned, it's true that local community have been incredible and extremely important in addressing, also giving data, because we don't have data about who is in need of support. So this was extremely important. They were extremely active. And then in terms of also at the national level, there were some initiatives, for example, distribution of food in Uganda, or stop the eviction. So there were kind of positive actions. And we have been, for example, working, providing shelters for homeless, for also women that were victims of domestic violence that has increased tremendously during the lockdown period. adults, and also providing support to people with children, so in terms of food, in terms of healthcare support. What to me it's quite incredible is that finally we can see that we can mobilize funding quickly, we can get the kind of political support, we can create alliance, something that just before was almost impossible, looked like impossible. So the problem here and now, we have the momentum, I think, to really change the way, as a urban planner, change the way we plan cities, change the way we think development and cooperation, and really point out the structural issues related to inequalities. So we have to sustain this momentum. And so it's not like, as I said, an emergency, but it's really like an issue, an endemic issue that we need to address.
Should I?
Yes, Rui.
Go ahead, Rui, go.
So, politically, Lisbon started more than 10 years ago, this strong strategy to empower priority or poor communities within Lisbon. And what we've proven with this strategy and several programs and steps that we've implemented since is that it is way more efficient to resource bottom-up initiatives in terms of the impacts, the effects of for the amount of money invested in this way. That what is happening now is this, not only this ecosystem, as Rozina was saying, differently than probably other countries, is way better organized, is way more politically influenced, to the point that with the present crisis and the perspective of what will happen economically, socially, educationally, employment, and so on, that the European funds with this, well, CLLD is basically let's call it a federation of local bottom-up NGOs. Half of them are like resident unions created throughout this 10 years period, who have the power collectively to decide how and where should European funding be applied, be invested in projects run by themselves within these districts. That's what's happening in Lisbon. And what we are doing now is that we have a call of well, about 3 million open now until the end of July. But this strategy has proven to be so effective that we are already negotiating to double the amount of European funding available up to the end of July. And the impact on employment, on cutting early school dropout, on including fragile citizens or excluded citizens by all sorts of common discrimination is so much more impactful than anything else that I believe because of this, we will face and react to this crisis in a very different way. And remember that Lisbon is a city too much dependent on tourism, and tourism in Portugal and especially in Lisbon has suffered a huge impact. So like most of the low income, the low paid salaries are basically all shut down, and the recovery will be very slow. So this is also an opportunity to rebuild an economical model for the city, where it's not only not to be so dependent on just one sector, but just also the public generalized perception that the role of state and the role of organized forms of society, like the NGOs, like the local organizations, only by empowering them we can create a more resilient society and economy face the developments of this crisis, but also the others to come.
Thank you, Rui. That's exactly what we have to do. We have to empower those who have less means or have maybe not the best chances when they start with life. And that's the reason why I would like to ask Adam and Işın, because they are working with a specific group. It's Adam is involved in a long-term project, and I would like to know how they can do, or how they do empowering, and what they would suggest to take out of this crisis and make even more powerful and shared tool. So I would like to ask Adam and then Işın perhaps what they do with their students, with the community. We have been talking about community. What specifically can be done? Where are the lacks, and how do they program to have powerful next generations? Adam?
Yeah, so we are working primarily with minority youth. And something we like to think about and be careful of is how we think about this word empower, because I think at times it can be perceived as a way for one group to give power to another group through education or allocation of resources. And we recognize that this sort of savior mentality is not what we want to bring to the table at all. So instead, I think what we think when we think empower and when we think about our programming is how can we bring the resources we have and the things we have privilege and access to and give those to people who don't have privilege and access to those sorts of things, so that they can feel as if they have the agency to be agents of change and to define their own context now, and also to define their own context in the future. So the way we do that is we do a lot of co-creation. The young people we work with are driving most of the programming we're doing. They're telling us what they want to see, how they want to spend the money. And as our project is centered primarily around engaging other young people, this makes the most sense. I think oftentimes we assume that people cannot speak for themselves, especially minority and disenfranchised groups. And I think it's really important to listen. And so we've been doing a lot of listening and following their lead. And I think it's one of the reasons that our project has been so successful.
Thank you very much, Adam. In the introduction round, in the beginning of the 1 hour ago, we unfortunately forgot to introduce Işın because we had previously in the testing phase already an introduction round. And that's the reason why I would like to share a few words about Işın. She is from Turkey. I know her since a few years. And actually, I met her when the Gezi protests were sparkling from Turkey. And as an activist, as a curator, as an educator, she was very furious about the political situation and did a lot of things back then, had websites, shared the content from translated content from Turkish to other languages. Then she was, we had some projects in Vienna, and now she's in New York. So she has a wide spectrum of experience in inequalities, and she's also teaching at the Işın Art Village. So I would like to ask Işın, how do you try to fight these inequalities in your daily life, in your projects? Would you like to highlight one of them? Either you're teaching now in New York or your art village in Turkey.
Işın, you're muted.
Sorry, you're muted. No, try again.
Sure.
Okay, we'll
thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Bahanur, for the introduction. And when actually we met earlier than Gezi protest for Sinopale, but during the Gezi protest, I just shared a link everywhere Taksim.net that was a collective work reflecting on what was happening in the protests in Turkey. I would like to perhaps start reflecting on Daniela's question and then combining the both, because I find them very relevant. So I have been living and teaching in the US over the past 4 years. And right now I have been teaching at a state university where you have a great chance to witness the social injustice and all the also discriminations, but unequal access to things very well. And I think one of the reasons I was trying to point out for all these protests happening right now became very visible during the pandemic, where the African-American communities with migration background, people of color were impacted by the virus way more, not for genetic reasons, but for the economic reasons and all these ongoing social injustice that causes people working in harsher working conditions, having less access, if no access at all, to health systems, etc. And the situation became so visible here that people are out there protesting, trying to find some solutions. What is happening is more like individual and more private sort of initiatives trying to create some solutions, but in the state level, it looks very complex. The system, we have to find and rebuild new ways of how the system can work. And also, you mentioned earlier, the homeless people, which is the number of homeless people are tremendous in this country. And those were, of course, had no chances at all to access to any health services. So the problem here only became way more visible with the numbers of the people dying or being impacted by the by the virus. And I have a lot of African-American students and students coming from minority backgrounds, and I witnessed them losing their parents, losing their family members, and or they also live in these multi-generational situations in larger families, and they have elderly people living with them, their grandparents, etc., while they had to go out and work. When we were doing all these online education, they could not join because they needed to be the person who brings money home, but also had the risk of bringing the virus home. So witnessing that, here I find the situation very complex, and the notion of social justice becomes a very, very important element here. So the inclusion has to happen within the system. So what we are able to do among ourselves is just working collectively for those whomever we can reach, and make sure that we create platforms where they can have access to these conversations. So who is being heard, who has the voice, is also very important in this manner. In terms of, for example, Nisin Art Village that you mentioned, this is in Turkey. So the quality of art education in Turkey is, unfortunately, in general, is not very, very good. And even the ones who have the luxury of having access to better education systems, they are also lacking the quality in the art education. But then there are many areas in Turkey, many communities who have no access at all. And in this village, we are trying to make that education accessible for everybody. And because of the lack of any governmental funds, we are trying to solve the economy within the economy that is built in this village. So it is the continuation of mathematics village that is founded by a mathematician. This is a longer subject, but what happens is the students who can pay for their education, and with the inputs, with the financial input they provide, the ones who have no access can come and study with scholarships. And all the professors who are involved give their classes voluntarily. And then this last other thing I would like to mention is, other than all these groups that we know about, women under the domestic violence and all these minority groups, etc., who were impacted by this situation, we also have people who are working in the art and culture field under very precarious situations. They also got impacted, artists, cultural workers, who have no income, no access to nothing also. So there have been some initiatives, again, here in the US, not necessarily by the states so much, but again, the cultural organizations try to support artists and cultural workers during the time of pandemic too.
Thank you very much, Işın. I met you in Sinopale, and I have to say that the work you do and all those works, whenever you have a kind of a festival, when you have artists in residency, when you have a placemaking project, whenever people who are not exposed to art, architecture, any kind of empowerment to express what they want, have the chance to do something, then maybe not everyone, but some people learn something. So they know how to do things, how to have an impact, how to express themselves, how to change things, combine the dots, whatever brings the stone to a move. Therefore, I would like to invite everyone who wants to do internship with Işın, maybe in Turkey, or maybe there is an option also in the States to join. And this physical work, this physical connection with, even though this pandemic is a little bit difficult, is very important and is the culture of the community. If we don't connect one by one, if we don't live what we preach, if we don't show how it works, it can't work. It's not something you can learn for an exam and then it's reality, or you write some papers and then it's reality. We have to live it daily, and that's the reason why all those projects you are doing are so important, because they change the dialogue, they change the culture. Dani?
Yes, I thank everybody. And in the meantime, we're getting some questions from the audience that are really getting into the details of, up to now, if we invest in priority neighborhoods. There was a very interesting questions coming up, and I'm afraid it's already 6:15 and we can't, let's say, exploit too much the time of our speakers who have already invested and shared with us a lot of their insights. And I can speak for myself, as you have seen, I am tired on a Friday, and I apologize to Işın. I mean, I even then posed you the question immediately after, but I didn't introduce you. It's been a long week for everybody, so I apologize for that. But this said, so it's been very, very insightful. I think we were saying at the beginning, what are we aspiring to do in this session today? And I think we have tried with our speakers to set a little bit of the coordinates of what is happening, but also what should be ahead of us in the next months. As you know, this is, at the end of the day, this is what we've been discussing throughout the whole series of Cooperative City in Quarantine. And this is also what we will be possibly not only discussing now that we're ending the quarantine, but actually having more of a chance. Many of you are already doing this, but more collectively also taking action, and not only in the emergency, but also trying to foster long-term change and social inclusion. At this point, I think with Bahanur, we have a big thank you to all of you for the time that you have shared with us today. And this is bringing us also to the next step. As I said, since the beginning of the quarantine, I'm doing the episodes, as long as the weather is holding, from my garden, because I want to share with those of you who are locked at home a little bit of open space. But nowadays, the quarantine, even in Italy, that was the country with probably the harshest quarantine, is entering in a new phase. I believe and hope that all of you have the opportunity of going to the park. So what all this to say that we're heading towards the end of Cooperative City in Quarantine, but this is not the end, but it is the beginning. So we are thankful to our speakers for sharing their insights today in the terms of social inclusion, because what we are doing now is collecting the coordinates that are coming from our speakers and trying to, what we aspire to do with Eutropian is to bring what is happening to the ground, to the policy making. We don't do this together, we do this with you. And this has been the path of Cooperative City in Quarantine over these months. And this is what is happening in the next episode, next week. Next week, the episode will be planning post-COVID-19 cooperative cities. And the idea is based on all the fantastic insights that we have received from the speakers of today and of the previous 13 episodes that we have had up to now, to bring also to policy making at EU level the insights of what is happening really on the ground, and where should the capacity building go, where should the policy go, and where should the funding go, because we cannot always operate for free in emergency condition. But we also, as Giulia was saying, this is the moment when we really have to gear the resources and the capacities towards what is the real change. So please be with us also next Friday, because this will not be the end. From this, what we aim to doing is definitely taking a bit of time off from myself, and I can say the whole team of Eutropian and Cooperative City. There's been a lot of work in trying to bring all the interesting speakers, trying to promote, get the audience together, and all of this. And we apologize also with the audience that questions arrive and we don't have enough time to answer them all. So apologies for some of the questions that arrived, but there will be more space for further discussions, because what we aspire at doing in the next months is not only more Cooperative City in Quarantine, but planning cooperative cities together. So this is also where there will be definitely more webinars, but there will be also new formats of bringing together the knowledge and trying to bring forward the practices. From my side, a huge thank you. You've really been a very positive ending of my working week. So I'm very happy of this and looking forward to the discussion. And thank you, Bahanur, for co-moderating and compensating for all my amnesia and clear Alzheimer, that is very precocious Alzheimer that is coming across. It happens, you know.
You did a great job, and our speakers were very wonderful, and I think they brought a lot of different perspectives on the table, and I'm really grateful that they were all with us today.
So to the speakers, I would say, please don't rush off. We'll steal from you just one more minute to just say informally goodbye between us. And to our audience and so on, stay tuned, be with us next Friday, share with us any insights, comments that you still have, because anyway, we can always forward them also to the speakers. You have anyway the contacts of them, so you can go ahead and contact them directly if you want further information. And this said, Bahanur, I think we can close the live for today. We thank you all so much, and we wish you a fantastic weekend. See you next week.
Take care.